My name is Scott Morangello. I am the chair of the Department of Catholic Studies. I'm also an associate professor here at DePaul. It's my honor to lead the events this evening and to be the MC for the 5th annual Berrigan-McAlister Award, which will be given this year to Omar Haramy, director of the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center, and my new good friend Don Wagner will be accepting the award on Omar's behalf a little bit later. The Berrigan-McAlister Award is given to a person or organization that exemplifies the practice of active Christian nonviolence. Such nonviolence is rooted in the life of Jesus, who combined the refusal of violence in violent situations with the power of universal love. From the civil rights movement to the Vietnam War, through the movement against nuclear weapons and beyond, few Catholics in the United States have been more influential than the Berrigan brothers, Daniel and Philip, and Elizabeth McAlister. McAlister married Philip Berrigan and was his lifelong collaborator. Their work against war and in support of peace, a life of provocative, nonviolent protest, extensive writing and teaching, and everyday experiments in intentional community, has earned them international stature in the church and secular society. As I said, this is the 5th annual award. The first year we gave the award to the Kings Bay Plowshares movement, of which the Berrigan and McAlister families are an integral part. In the second year, we gave it to the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation, which is here in Chicago. The third year, we went international and gave the award to Elizabeth Kanini-Kanau, who was a peace activist in East Africa. Last year, we came back to the US and had a wonderful celebration last year of the Los Angeles Catholic Worker. And as I said, this year, we are very pleased to go international again and award Omar Haramy and his organization the award. Let me give you a little bit of the agenda for this evening. Morgan McIntosh will be explaining to us a little bit about the extensive and wonderful collection of materials that the DePaul Library has on the Berrigans and on Elizabeth McAlister and on other really influential and important Catholics in 20th century America. Our great Ken Berrigan will be introducing Omar Haramy himself. We have a pre-recorded lecture from Omar. He lives in Jerusalem, so we'll be watching that. Ken will then give the award officially to Don, and then there will be, then we will have the recorded lecture, and then we'll have some time for questions that Don and others would be happy to answer. Before we get into any of that, we have a few years ago, and in fact here in Chicago, we were able to kind of do the preview, I think it's in 2020, the world premiere of this movie called Devout and Dangerous, which is about the Berrigan brothers. We're not going to watch the whole movie now, obviously, but I do want to play a little bit of the trailer. After we watch the trailer, then we'll have Morgan come up, and then Ken. Okay? Thank you.
You have the FBI saying that they were terrorists. It was the largest manhunt in history.
J. Edgar Hoover went personally insane trying to track him down.
We pose the question, who has committed the crimes of violence?
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest.
I went down there in my clerical outfit, and the whole thing stopped when they saw a priest. I had to join them, and that was my first arrest.
Daniel Berrigan and his brother Philip are now facing up to 30 years in jail for their latest protest.
Why did you do it? Did you do it again?
We are trying
trying to say something about the truth of our times. We've opened up these grievous questions a little further as to whether or not Americans are allowed to kill the innocent.
They took hundreds of files that were being used to draft people into the war in Vietnam, pour their own blood on these draft files, and burn them with homemade napalm.
Once a person's file was destroyed, they couldn't be drafted.
I had to adjust to the possibility of spending the rest of my life in jail.
What are you doing out on Block Island?
Well, I was writing and reading and meditating.
What are your future plans?
Resistance.
Oh, we can be heroes just for one day.
We didn't bow our heads and remain silent.
It seems scandalous that a priest would be doing that, a priest would be protesting.
Why has the Cardinal said nothing about the atrocious obliteration bombing that Nixon has undertaken in our name?
That's the #1 business of the world. We can't burn the planet down.
It was hard saying goodbye to our parents as they marched off into the fire.
Our oldest just graduated from college, and he's missing those significant moments in their lives. And that's not easy.
That's how they viewed life. Sometimes you're watching the kids, sometimes you're throwing blood on the Pentagon, sometimes you're in prison.
I spent most of the time that I knew them wishing that I had that courage.
Killing people is not a good way of solving human difficulty.
That statement is important enough to make if it means that you have to go back behind bars for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years.
No problem.
Here's Morgan.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, good evening. I actually should have put a couple of photographs of some of the selections from the archives up to tease you, but I didn't, so you're just going to have to listen. So just to introduce myself, my name is Morgan McIntosh Hodgetts. I'm an archivist here at Special Collections and Archives. And what we do is collect, preserve, and provide access to primary source materials in support of teaching, learning, and research. The collections in our department, they document the history of our university, the community organizations and individuals who work for social justice that have entrusted their materials to us, and as well as the life and legacy of St. Vincent de Paul. In the 1990s, Robert Ludwig, who was then director of the University of Ministry at the time, invited Father Daniel Berrigan to teach courses and lecture at DePaul University as a visiting professor. Bob also coordinated spring break service experiences at Jonah House in Baltimore, Maryland, so DePaul students could learn from Philip Berrigan and Liz McAlister at their community, which was dedicated to nonviolent protest actions. Bob also initiated the original discussions to preserve the Berrigan archives at DePaul. And in the correspondence that documents those conversations, I've pulled a quote, and Bob had really thought about this, and he said, "Having the collection at DePaul will allow students who may be envisioning futures in the peace movement realize that their goals are very attainable. The collections give students the basic research materials for understanding how people have gotten into this kind of work and stayed here." We have 3 unique collections at the DePaul University Library that have been entrusted to us by members of the Berrigan family. They're called the Philip Berrigan and Elizabeth McAlister papers, the Jerome C. Berrigan papers, and the Daniel Berrigan papers. All 3 preserve the stories and voices of the Berrigan family, as well as their strong network of friends, colleagues, and supporters. The breadth and depth of these materials serve as source materials for those who are researching not only the Berrigans and peace activism, but that idea of this dedication to social justice and balancing with the family and your faith values. And these source materials have been used for books, films, such as the one that you saw the preview for, scholarship amongst our own DePaul University students, as well as inspiration for art projects. During class sessions and individual study, students read letters written by Phil, Dan, and Liz to friends and family while they were incarcerated for their peace actions against nuclear weapons. Through these documents in the archives, which are deeply personal, DePaul students connect humanity with history. This is precisely the goal that Bob Ludwig envisioned, and through these connections with the past, coupled with opportunities to spend time with recipients of the Berrigan-McAlister Award, our DePaul students develop ideas about how to challenge harmful practices and integrate peace and justice activism into their communities. So we are very fortunate to work with faculty members who wish to integrate these collections into their classes. We also welcome researchers from across the country and internationally to come and use the materials here at in our archives. So please visit us in the reading room to learn more, or reach out to me if you have questions. Thank you so much, Scott, for this opportunity.
Thanks so much to Morgan. Before we have Ken introduce Omar, I just want to say it's very hard to believe, but I want to say this publicly, that it's hard to believe that Ken is actually retiring. Mike Buddy somehow allowed this to happen, which I was assured wouldn't. Ken has been integral to the Berrigan-McAlister Award since its founding, really more than about 6 years ago now. Without him, the award simply wouldn't exist, and I believe basically every year it's Ken's idea who we're going to award, because he always comes up with the really good ideas. And Ken's connection specifically to Omar this year really made the award happen this year. So even though Ken's retiring, we're not going to let him stop being part of the award. So I just made that up. And so it is my honor to introduce my pal, Ken, who is, I should make clear, professor in the program of Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies here at DePaul. And he will be introducing Omar, will then, and Ken will be presenting the award to Don. Ken.
Good evening. I'd like to begin by sharing a word about one of the namesakes of this award. In 1982, I met Daniel Berrigan at what became a turning point in my life. Through a series of events, I found myself having a riveting 3-hour conversation with him in New York City. At the end of our time together, I asked Dan if there was anything I could do for him. He was facing a lengthy prison sentence for civil disobedience at that time, and I thought I could provide some support. He just looked me straight in the eye and said, "Don't do anything for me. Find some people you can pray with and march with." It was not a suggestion, it was literally marching orders. And eventually, a few months later, I said yes to those orders. I found some people to pray with and march with, and my life swerved in a dramatically new direction, a direction I have followed ever since. Dan and his brother Philip and his sister-in-law Elizabeth McAlister taught me by their actions and their words the power and depth of faithful and courageous nonviolence. Nonviolence is the power unleashed by the refusal to do harm, the power that combines the rejection of violence with love in action. It has two hands. On the one hand, I will not cooperate with your evil or your injustice or your violence, and on the other hand, I'm open to you as a human being. I learned this nonviolence from Dan Berrigan, and more recently, I learned it all over again from Omar Haramy. Omar is a Palestinian Christian from Jerusalem who serves as the director of the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center. Sabeel, which means both the way and spring in Arabic, is a 30-year-old organization dedicated to the Palestinian liberation of theology, liberation of justice and active nonviolence, engaging in peace building and working for a just peace. Haramy and Sabeel in Palestine are struggling for a more just future where Muslims, Jews, Christians, and others can live together in peace and justice through the power of nonviolent resistance. I met Omar last August when I took part in a delegation to Palestine entitled Christians for Ceasefire. Under Omar's leadership, we mourned the October 7th terror attack by Hamas that left over 1,200 people dead and hundreds taken hostage. We met with families of those hostages. We denounced Israel's subsequent air and ground invasion of Gaza and its horrific toll of tens of thousands killed, tens of thousands injured, and the entire population facing the prospect of rampant disease, starvation, and long-lasting trauma. We prayed that a larger war across the Middle East could be averted. We called for an end to the U.S. government's arms shipments, doing so at the crossing at the border of Gaza where those weapons were being brought in, and we came to a deeper understanding of the violence and injustice of over 70 years of occupation. All of this, including the spiraling violence across the West Bank, came into focus for us not through political briefings by Middle East experts in Tel Aviv or by learning theological pronouncements in Jerusalem, but by hitting the road. This was where the nonviolence came in. As we traveled by van to Nablus, Hebron, Belin, the outskirts of Bethlehem and East Jerusalem, passing through one military road check after another, Omar shared with us the principles of nonviolence by which his organization operates. Above the sound of traffic, we were told that active nonviolence is a practice of love and justice. It is a path of change that includes refusing to be enemies with anyone else, being liberated from hate and animosity, shunning revenge and retaliation, pursuing the truth by confronting falsehood and deception, championing the oppressed, the poor, and the marginalized, resisting violence, and pursuing peace and reconciliation. As one of the activists said that we met that week, evil does not defeat evil. Only good can do that. Day after day, we saw these high-minded precepts translated into concrete reality. We saw this with a member of Rabbis for Human Rights, whom we met during an interfaith service about 1 kilometer from the Gaza border, and who said he opposes his government's war in Gaza. We saw it with a family in the village of Beit Jalah, west of Bethlehem, who were aided by Combatants for Peace, a group of former Israeli and Palestinian soldiers, stubbornly but nonviolently occupying property to keep it from being confiscated. And we saw nonviolence put into practice by the Tent of Nations community near Bethlehem, where they recounted for us that community's 30-year legal and political struggle to keep their land from being swallowed up illegally by Israeli settlers. But they also launched into their own list of nonviolence principles. I was getting it from both ends here. We refuse to be victims. We refuse to hate. We refuse to be enemies. Nonviolence is not weakness. Justice will prevail. These are only a few of the many instances of nonviolence in action we saw firsthand. Approaches aimed at escaping the trap of escalatory and retaliatory violence and pursuing what Andrew Young, a key organizer of the U.S. civil rights movement, called the way out of no way, including rejecting both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Though it is not an approach for change that everyone chooses, this determined nonviolent resistance has a long history there, which we also learned about during our time. What I saw in real time was the conviction that a just and lasting peace means breaking the cycle of violence and finding alternatives that don't fuel escalation and retaliation, that address the foundational issues of occupation. But this is not to be left to Palestinians and Israelis alone. It means that my own country must stop fueling that fire. Everywhere we went, we heard that the United States must do this. So when we hear the principles of nonviolence, these are principles that my own government could benefit from living by. But until that time, we must learn from the likes of Daniel Berrigan and Omar Haramy on how to work step by step for a much more just and nonviolent world. In light of this, we are thankful to award the 5th annual Berrigan-McAlister Award to Omar Haramy. Omar let us know that while he was willing to receive this award, he wouldn't be able to attend the award ceremony in person. This was the note he sent to us. The war in my country continues and military operations are still ongoing in the West Bank. It is not appropriate timing for me to travel in relation to my community, my family, and the Sabeel on-the-ground work. This may make the strongest point of all as to why Omar was chosen for this year's award. In light of this, Reverend Dr. Donald Wagner of Sabeel is present tonight to accept the award on Omar's behalf. Don.
Thank you very much, Ken. And thank you to the faculty for this award. This is really a courageous award at this time. We are living in a time of a televised live stream genocide. We who are sitting here, our tax dollars are supplying over 80% of the weaponry. It's really up to us to change that. But for you to honor a Palestinian voice, which is absent from most of our media, I really honor and thank you for that. I'm humbled to stand instead of a giant like Omar, but it would be risky for him to come at this time when we have students who are in protest being arrested, let alone imagine a Palestinian coming in who leads protests. So thank you. This is a very profound statement. Omar is someone I really look up to. He is so busy. He's averaging about 2 delegations a month, plus everything else he is doing. He is doing above and beyond the call to duty. I remember I was the program director for Friends of Sabeel when Omar was being discussed as a possible replacement. And I was so excited because this is perfect. Naeem Atik did a phenomenal job, and now for a younger fellow to take the lead. And someone said to me, but he doesn't have seminary. I said, my God, don't send him to seminary, it'll ruin him. This guy is such an out-of-the-box creative thinker. He not only teaches nonviolent resistance, he lives it. It's his lifestyle. So let us listen to him now, but may we all be moved to take action, because this problem sits right here with us in the U.S. as much as in Palestine. So I salute and thank you, DePaul, so much.
On behalf of Sabeel and myself, I want to thank you so much for the honor of this nomination. This is such a meaningful and humbling award. To be honest, I don't feel that I deserve it. And I hope you'll allow me a moment to share why. The Berrigan-McAlister Award carries the weight of a legacy rooted in the radical, courageous love of Jesus. a love that chooses peace even in the face of violence. It honors those who live out active Christian nonviolence, and that feels like a calling far greater than anything I have managed to live up to. The lives of Daniel and Philip Berrigan and Elizabeth McAlister, who together resisted war, challenged injustice, and built community with deep integrity, have shaped generations. Their example continues to inspire me and so many others who are trying, in our own imperfect ways, to walk the path of peace. We, the people of Palestine and Israel, are in many ways both fortunate and deeply burdened. Unlike so many conflicts and war zones around the world that rarely make the headlines, our suffering is often visible. But being in the news doesn't always mean being truly seen. The hope is that global attention might lead to action, that the world might feel compelled to be part of the solution, or at the very least, less complicit in the problem. Sadly, that's not always the case. We also feel deeply burdened because of the enormous responsibility to bring this deep suffering to a peaceful end. As with any conflict, there are countless narratives, and while no single story holds the full truth, some narratives are closer to the truth and to shared human values than others. I'm not here to speak from a nationalistic lens, but from the perspective of human rights, of international law, and most importantly, from the viewpoint of the oppressed. I speak as one rooted in the narrative of my people, many of whom are the descendants of the early church, the followers of Jesus Christ, who himself was born under occupation, witnessed injustice, survived the massacre, preached liberation to the oppressed, challenged power, and was condemned to die by an empire that ruled much of the world. That same empire placed him on the cross, the punishment of rebels and terrorists. Jesus, the Prince of Peace for billions today, was once labeled a threat to the rulers of his time. Our people continue to suffer. We are dispossessed, displaced, starved, and subjected to ongoing dehumanization and demonization, justified by a narrative that paves the way for genocide. But we take no comfort, nor do we make excuses in being the victims of victims. We reject the idea that this is our fate. We refuse to accept the ongoing Nakba, our catastrophe, as normal. Like all people, we have the right to protect our communities, our homeland, and above all, our values. And for many of us, the way we resist is by walking in the footsteps of Jesus, standing beside him as he walks with the suffering. Palestinian liberation theology is a response born out of deep faith and lived struggle. It's the theology many of us, as Palestinian Christians and allies of the movement, began to shape as we read the Bible and asked ourselves, what does it mean to follow Jesus while living under military occupation? In the very land where he once walked, how can we liberate the Bible and our theology from those who misuse it to justify the dispossession, displacement, and even the annihilation of our people? And how can we instead turn to the Word of God as a source of our own liberation and the liberation of all people and all of God's creation? This theology did not appear out of thin air. It was developed through deep engagement with Scripture and the decision to follow Jesus, not just in name but in action. Our co-founders, including Reverend Naim Atik, whom we call the father of Palestinian liberation theology, rooted their work in the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. At the heart of Jesus' message, we find three cross-cutting themes that guide us. The first is inclusivity, the radical truth that we all are the children of God, equally loved and cherished. This is not easy to accept in a world where every religious community claims to have God's special favor. But God's love is not tribal, it is universal. And in our theology of love, we insist there are no outsiders in God's family. The second theme is justice. Reverend Naeem Ati teaches us that we cannot claim to be faithful to God without also being a prophetic voice for justice and peace. We are called to stand up not only for the popular causes, but for every cause that is just. Just is not optional. It is essential to faith. And the third is nonviolence. We know that injustice is real. We know Jesus calls us to confront it, to overcome it. But he also made it clear, injustice is evil and violence is also evil. When we fight evil with evil, we only make evil stronger. Instead, Jesus calls us to love even our enemies, not by excusing their actions or abandoning the oppressed, but by refusing to return violence with violence. We are called to confront evil without picking up a sword. Since this award honors the path of nonviolence, I want to focus more deeply on that. Though justice and inclusivity remain inseparable from nonviolence. Nonviolence for me is not some foreign concept we try to introduce into our societies. In truth, most people around the world are nonviolent by nature. It is violence that has to be taught, encouraged, and normalized. Nonviolence, on the other hand, is rooted in our humanity. It is the norm, the instinct to live, to care, to protect, not to destroy. But beyond being morally right, nonviolence is also the most effective path. It is the path that leads to lasting change without the threat of losing our soul in the process. I want to share just 3 stories. I wish I had the time to share more, because there are so many in my circles. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things that continue to challenge me, inspire me, and renew my faith in what is possible when we choose love over fear. The first story I will share is the story of the stubborn old lady. No Palestinian can enter Jerusalem without passing through a military checkpoint. These checkpoints are not about security. They are about control, about limiting freedom of movement. To pass, you need a military-issued permit. The most common reasons Palestinians apply for a permit are to access the main Palestinian hospitals in Jerusalem, or to access the places of worship, for people just to simply to pray. Others apply to visit family, to study, to work. I've stood at these checkpoints countless times. But one moment has stayed with me, one story I will never forget. It was the story of the most stubborn woman I have ever met, an older woman at the checkpoint who, like many others, simply wanted to pray. She crossed into the checkpoint area and asked the soldiers to let her through. "Where is your permit?" the soldiers asked. "I don't have one," she said. "Then go back," they told her. But she refused. Everyone in line, myself including, yes, even me, now standing here as the recipient of this nonviolence award, began asking her to step aside. We had permits or the correct IDs. We had places to be, appointments to keep. We tried to reason with her, explain the process. She ignored us. Some thought maybe she couldn't hear. We raised our voices till she stayed silent. The soldiers joined in, trying to pressure her, but she did not budge. Eventually, a military unit of 4 soldiers was sent to remove her by force. And then she did something no one expected. She sat on the ground, right there in the middle of the checkpoint, and began to cry. She shouted, "I want to go to Jerusalem. I want to pray." The soldiers tried to carry her, but she was too heavy. And something shifted in that moment. We, the crowd who had been annoyed with her, suddenly found ourselves admiring her, supporting her, standing with her and cheering her. The army, fearing the beginnings of a riot, opened the gates. She stood up and ran. She ran straight into Jerusalem like a 5-year-old. That day, I witnessed one older woman, against all odds, win. Without a weapon, without backing down, just a woman with faith and determination, walking her own quiet revolution. The second story I want to share is about Palestinian women. Palestinian women are remarkable. For centuries, within Arab and Middle Eastern culture, women were protected by the men of their families, walking beside them, traveling with them, sheltered by tradition. Even today, laws still exist requiring women to travel internationally with male guardians. I don't agree with these laws, but I understand their roots. Times when the roads were dangerous and lawless, and families relied on men and swords to protect the woman. But what happens when the threat comes down from a heavily armed occupying force? During the First Intifada, Palestinian women turned the narrative upside down. Traditionally seen as those in need of protection, they became the protectors. At that time, the Israeli military targeted Palestinian males, men and boys, regardless of age. Any male or group of males walking alone were seen as suspicious. Young boys, students, workers, none were safe from arrest or assault. And so, women stepped into the new role. They began accompanying males, offering their presence as a shield. A man walking alone might be harassed or detained, but a man walking with a woman was somehow less threatening. The soldiers hesitated, and when they didn't, it was the woman, who stood firm, raising their voices, confronting authority, demanding dignity. I have seen this with my own eyes. I've witnessed women boldly liberating young boys, myself included, from military jeeps, pulling us out, wrapping us in their arms, claiming us as their own sons. They didn't wait for permission. They just came forward and said, "This is my child." And it worked. Over time, these women became mothers to all Palestinian children. Their arms extended beyond bloodlines. They succeeded in making every child part of their own family. And to this day, we often say, every Palestinian woman is a mother. They didn't fight with weapons, they fought with love, courage, and the sheer force of their presence. What the world once saw as weakness, vulnerability, tenderness, motherhood, they transformed it into a source of strength. They taught us all something essential, that nonviolence is not passive, it's not silent, it is powerful. It confronts injustice heads on, without surrendering to hatred or fear. The third story I want to share is how we seek the humanity of the oppressor without abandoning the oppressed, a fundamental teaching in Palestinian liberation theology. A story happened on a cold, rainy night near Bethlehem. My friend was driving his family, his mother, his wife, and their 3 young children back home from their farmhouse. The road was dark and empty. Suddenly, an Israeli military jeep stopped them. A masked officer stepped out and ordered my friend, the father, to get out of the car and stand in the pouring rain. The soldiers were fully armed, faces hidden, and the area was completely isolated. No witnesses, no protection. After questioning my friend, the commander demanded the entire family exit the vehicle so they could search it. A common practice in Palestine, in our occupied territories. My friend pleaded, "Please, it's raining heavily. The children are small. My mother is elderly. Show some mercy." The officer insisted. He said it would only take a few minutes, that they had strict orders to search every car. He promised, "We won't hurt them." My friend realized he had no choice. He walked back to the car, opened the door, and then speaking loudly and clearly in English, he told his children, his wife, and elderly mother, "Please step out of the car. The soldiers have a job to do. They are good people, and they won't harm you." The commander was confused. "Why are you speaking to your children in English?" he asked. "Aren't you Palestinian? Don't you speak Arabic?" My friend looked at him and said, "I wasn't speaking to my children, nor my mother, nor my wife. I was speaking to you and your soldiers, reminding you of what you promised me." The soldiers conducted the search quickly. Nothing was found, but something else happened that night. For a brief moment, my friend made them see his children not as threats, but as human beings. He didn't give in to fear or hate. He didn't surrender his dignity. Instead, he held up a mirror and reflected back their own humanity. That night, he protected his family not with weapons, but with wisdom, restraint, and faith in the possibility of moral conscience. This is the essence of nonviolence. It's not weakness, it is courage. It is holding space for justice while never letting go of compassion. It is the discipline of love in the face of hatred and the commitment to human dignity in the midst of dehumanization. In Palestinian liberation theology, we learn from Jesus. His time in Palestine, living under Roman occupation, seeking dialogue with every person living on this beautiful yet wounded land. As Christians, we believe that Jesus is God in flesh and that he came to live among us. As we learned from Jesus, maybe he learned from us humans. Maybe he learned from Mary, his virgin mother, and how she navigated a deeply traditional society. Maybe she too stood her ground with Roman soldiers. Maybe she too taught him resilience. Perhaps the story of the persistent widow demanding justice from a corrupt judge was not a parable, but a lived reality of their time, told to him by his mother, Mary, as a bedtime story. We seek the humanity of the oppressor not because we are naive, but because we are all made in the image of God. The rain falls on all of us. The sun shines on us all. This belief is shared humanity is not a weakness. It is our strength. Like Jesus, we observe the honor the amazing leaders in our communities who dare to speak up and stand up through nonviolence. We celebrate the students who disrupt hate with speech, the ones who demand that their universities divest from military occupation and human rights violations. We honor the educators, the professors, like my good friend Reverend Don Wagner, who paid a price for choosing what is right over what is easy. Rest assured, comrades, brothers and sisters, we are not powerless. We are not defeated. We are the ones who are already free because we have chosen to love, to stand for justice, and to affirm life even in the face of death. Let us remember the students who built the encampments for justice. Let us say the names like Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Mahdawi and the thousands of others who continue this sacred work. May our nonviolence resistance be bold. May our love be fierce. May our struggle be faithful. And may we never forget the arc of the moral universe bends. But it bends towards justice only when we push. And we are still pushing. Let us remain faithful to Jesus, provocative when needed, persistent when ignored, and kind even to those who call us enemies. From the city of the resurrection, from Jerusalem, I continue to pray and hold you in my prayers. May we all continue to walk the path of Jesus, the path of justice and peace. Thank you very much for this opportunity and love from Palestine. Thank you.
So it's about what? 7:25. We go until 8, and we wanted to provide some time for questions. If you do have a question, and maybe Don and Ken can kind of field the questions from up here, if that'd be okay. If you have a question, please limit it to one question, and just so that all sorts of people can be heard. And there should be, wait, do we have a? Oh, right, that's what I was looking for. There's a microphone back there if you want to ask a question, and you can just kind of stand in line, and then Don and Ken will do their best to answer whatever questions or comments. Well, questions. We can stick to questions, that'd be great. People have.
Can you tell us more about Omar's life, his journey? I was able to spend 10 days with him, and he was just like relentless with what we were doing, including various nonviolent actions. But you have some more about his own journey.
Well, Omar was probably a very precocious child, and he is outgoing, deeply personable, and fearless. And I think that probably evolved over time. He was a student activist, I know, at Beers 8. He made a reference there to his activism as a child, probably throwing stones at soldiers, or maybe even more nonviolent than that, and being arrested, pulled into a Jeep. And you heard him talk about how the women would come up and say, "This is my child," and it may not be, but the women stood up. And I think he has been nurtured by the community. And I met him first when he was working mainly with youth, with Sabeel in Jerusalem, and did a terrific job. And then when Naeem Atik retired, as I said, the opportunity came along and he took it. That remark about the seminary, I think, was very appropriate. This guy is naturally creative. He's intuitive, as I said, fearless, but he really lives nonviolence in liberation theology. What he explained, that's his worldview. That's how he lives. He's got 2 wonderful kids, a beautiful wife, and I guess that's enough to let you know who Omar is. But again, you heard him. I mean, that was such a powerful message coming from a Holocaust, genocide, and that genocide has now spread into the West Bank. So we need to think about that. That's the context in which he ministers.
Maybe I could add one more thing, which is I have focused on a lot of other areas of peace and justice in my 40 years as a practitioner of nonviolence. Last August, I got a note from a friend of mine at Georgetown University, Eli McCarthy, who's been an organizer with Christians for Nonviolence and Christians for Ceasefire. And I just had that feeling I should respond to this invitation. Part of it was informed by the fact that we had an encampment here at DePaul. I taught a course the previous quarter called Topics of Nonviolence, and the 20 students would come in from the encampment, and we would share feelings, reflections, dismay, but also I would always ask the question, what's the grand strategy? And we would look at different ways of how social change happens and how is that working in this case. And this was a really powerful, challenging, beautiful class where people were really engaging together, which I say is one of the great things about DePaul. It opens that kind of space in spite of how the encampment was taken down. I would say I responded to this invitation, and they said, come to an introductory Zoom call, which I did, and Omar came on, and I was just literally blown away by 45 minutes on nonviolence. It was nonviolence this, nonviolence that. And it wasn't like you were coming out of a situation where you're not facing any threat or problems. You're right in the middle of it. And he was saying, that's what we're doing. We're doing that in the West Bank. We're doing that in Palestine. And if you want to come and see, come and see. And then, as I said in my talk, it was just ongoing nonviolence training the whole time. I hadn't expected that. And in the van, going everywhere on the bumpy roads, we were getting that training. But the other part of that training was the actions themselves. So Omar got a text saying that a Bedouin family was under attack, and we just shot over in that area. We took a couple hours getting there. We went up on a hillside, and it was a family that was being harassed, been there for 30 years, by young Israeli settlers. It's sad, what Omar told us is that if you are 16, 17, 18, 16, 15, 16, 17, you will not be arrested for harassing Bedouin communities or Palestinian communities because you're underage. So, and I saw that. These were very, very young people. At the same time, an IDF soldier pulled up, and Omar goes over to the car, and the IDF soldier is saying, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here?" Well, we heard that some people are being harassed, but before we go any further, what's your name? I'm not going to tell you my name. I'm an IDF soldier. No, please. I would very much appreciate knowing your name. This went on for I watched the whole thing. It was like 17 minutes back and forth. And finally it says, Daniel. Well, I'm so happy to meet you, Daniel. And he started this conversation with him. And I was very moved by how he talked to Daniel, how he talked to the family, how he talked to another group of people who were standing vigil with the family. And then as the family finally decided to move on, and they had their sheep and goats and cows, and they were starting to move on. And we went back down to the bus that we were driving in, and a big group of young settlers started surrounding the bus and following the bus. I suspect Omar is doing actions like that 2 or 3 times a day, from what I could tell, and I'm very moved by that persistence. And as somebody who studied Jesus and nonviolence for 40 years, I feel like I've really learned much more about that from Omar Haramy.
Thank you both for your witness and sharing those stories. We often, at least I find, talk in this country of over there and here, and somehow Palestine liberation theology in an oppressed country, and developing it and articulating it and living it. And we think we're somehow different, and we're not living in an oppressed or occupied country. And I guess as we try to educate our neighbors and friends and those whom we disagree with, it's got to be more than just calling our legislatures. And what lessons can you give us about living in an occupied country called the United States?
Well, let me just make a couple comments. Yeah, we are in a situation where university campuses, if they have encampments or any form of resistance, or if people speak out, they are identified by pro-Israel groups like Bitar that has facial recognition access, AI, and it's now been revealed by Bitar that they are feeding those names to the Trump administration. And those are the people who are being arrested. Yeah, it shouldn't come as a surprise. There's a real campaign now, I think, to really remove the Palestinian issue, to normalize it. And that's where we really have to find our voice, our resistance. We can't let that happen. I'm trying to write something right now that the Palestine issue is the moral test case for the survival of international law and civil liberties in our country. First Amendment speech is at risk. First the Palestinians, then their supporters, then us. You remember what Niemöller said. First they came for the Jews, then they came for maybe the Marxist, communist, trade unionists. By the time they come for us, there was nobody left to stand up. So we have to find our voice, whether it's marching in the streets. I think we probably need to escalate it a little bit, more of the Berrigan process of nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience. We have to get more active in pushing our religious leaders. There's been a terrible silence from the churches, from religious leaders on all sides about not even calling for a permanent ceasefire and a cut in U.S. aid for weapons. So I think our marching orders are very clear. It's a dangerous time, but this is where, Omar's model of not fearing, of having the courage to find his voice and where he can stand up. So I don't want to send out any recipes, but I think we all have a way, whether it's from prayer to demonstrations, to sitting in at your senator or congressperson's office, or getting a collection of your church to really take a stand for Palestine. So those are just a few thoughts.
The greatest social movement in human history is coming. Why? Because it has to. We are the beneficiaries of a century or longer of conscious, deliberate, nonviolent strategies for change. And as Donna's saying, we can all do something as part of that. We're in the greatest crisis in this country since the Civil War. But we can all do something in response to that. It is critical that we pool our people power together to recognize that a movement of movements is necessary. And what I found out is that it's also deeply liberating and even at times fun to be part of efforts to pull together in this way. So these are immensely destructive times, but each of us in this room has more power than we think. In a room this size, Dr. King once said that if the 35 of us put our hearts together and pooled our resources, we could change the world. And I've seen that. In the 1980s, I got a vision. Somebody sent me a letter from Nicaragua, and my government in the 1980s was attacking the poor in Central America. And then I got a letter in the mail, And I opened the letter, and it said, "Dear Ken," and went on to tell me about the destruction that was going on, that my government was doing in Nicaragua. And I'd read things like this before. I'd seen things like this before. I'd heard different talks about it. But then halfway down the letter, it said, "I'm telling you now, so 10 years from now, you cannot say you did not know. Do everything in your power to stop this carnage." And I was reading that, and I looked up, and it was the first and maybe only time in my life I had a religious experience. There was a man standing in front of me with a dying child, and then that image evaporated. And then I said, "But I'm only one person. What can I do?" But I sat down and I wrote out a pledge for myself. I'm going to engage in nonviolent civil disobedience or legal protest if the U.S. escalates its military intervention. In those days, Reagan wanted to invade Nicaragua. It was in the news every day. And I wrote this little pledge, and then I started sending it around. And literally within 6 months, we'd built a movement called the Pledge of Resistance across this country. It was 100,000 people without the internet who organized themselves into 400 local groups. The United States invaded Iraq twice, Panama, Afghanistan, never invaded Nicaragua. And we learned from within the Reagan administration it was because ordinary people had organized themselves. Because one time 1,000 of us got arrested. And we heard from literally within people within the White House saying, that's why we're not going to invade Nicaragua. I believe in this power. That's where I learned about this power. And we have that power. And we are at a kind of a crossroads. And I felt like I just had a vision from Omar, just like I had a vision in 1982 from that unknown man who somehow got my address in Nicaragua. We all got the letter tonight. We got the letter from you. And we can do this. And what I learned is big movements are actually made up of lots of little groups. And I found when I was doing this work, you get yourself into what in those days we called an affinity group. Affinity, teachers, students, bricklayers, nurses, whatever. Whatever you get affinity with, and then you organize. And I'm so grateful for that you're all here tonight and that we had this message from heaven, but not really. It's this world, not separate. And I think there's so much we can do.
So we were, I'm going to talk about a word that's a very hard word in our society these days, and that is Semitism and anti-Semitism. And my question is going to be about this. When we were with Omar and Sabeel in November in Palestine, Craig had separated and gone to Hebron. I went to the South Hebron Hills, and we were with a Bedouin community whose home had been demolished 18 times. They were surrounded on 3 sides by Israeli settlers, a beautiful suburban-looking settlement. And in talking to him, in talking to Eid, he pointed just across the road to the Israeli settlement, and he said, "They're Semites, we're Semites. Why can't we learn to live in peace?" And my question to you, and I offer this to all of us as well, Chicago is the largest Palestinian community in the United States. There's a huge population of Palestinians, American Muslims, Palestine, students there's so many, and we're connected to them, and you can be connected to them, to live and walk and be allies with Palestinians in our own city. I was at a Palestinian flag raising on Saturday, the 77th anniversary of the Nakba. And to be in this humble presence of all these Palestinians who raised it in the Daily Plaza at half-mast because they did not feel they could honor their people by raising the flag full. So my question, because I know the president of DePaul University was interrogated, questioned last week before Congress, and so much of it is about anti-Semitism. How do we not bow down to the fear of being called anti-Semitic?
I'll start and Ken can finish. I'll try to be brief. One of the problems we have now is that laws are being passed, universities are being grilled on using a definition of anti-Semitism from the International Holocaust Alliance, which includes in it, I think it's point 6, you cannot criticize Israeli policy, nor can you criticize Zionism. Zionism is a political ideology. We need to be very clear. It can be critiqued, criticized. Jews do it. We criticize our government's policy. We can criticize any government, but why can't we criticize Israel? So this is being put forward as a type of anti-Semitism. So we have to be aware of that, but we have to always be careful that we critique political policy and political actions, not a living religion and living faith. So that needs to be very carefully, scrutinized. And it's absolutely legitimate that we join forces. Thank you for mentioning American Muslims for Palestine. They're doing tremendous work. Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now. Young Jews are not buying the Zionist ideology. We have right here in Chicago a synagogue that is anti-Zionist in its orientation, yet very Jewish, led by Rabbi Brant Rosen. We have tried to organize, my wife and I, seminars on Gaza 101, but to always have someone from Jewish Voice for Peace or another anti-Zionist organization, American Muslims for Palestine, and a Christian voice when we present Gaza in churches. But we have to have Palestinian voices among those. So, these are just a few thoughts I have. I think we just have to be carefully sensitive and courageous at the same time about parsing the difference between Zionism, which is an ideology, which is based on the settler colonial formula of taking a land and erasing the indigenous. And guess who else did that? United States among them, Canada. So that can be critiqued. So that's one way I would approach it. And it's very important now that we work in interfaith and with people of all faith and no faith on justice at this pivotal time of a Holocaust.
When I was in Palestine with Omar, he just said very clearly, we are not anti-Semitic. We refuse to be enemies. And I'm taking that on. And so that's how I approach this. And I also want to see all suffering relieved. And at the same time, I'm personally responsible for what my government is doing. And so that's what I am focusing on. I have some friends who have been involved in blockades of weapons shipments at Travis Air Force Base in Northern California. And I think it's important to be part of these kinds of efforts.
How do you apply the lessons and actions Omar has taught you to your daily life?
Well, I'm hoping I didn't get this lesson right, because he seems to just go nonstop. He would be all day with us, then all night with us, the next morning. The great thing I take away from Omar Haramy is that relentless persistence. At the same time, he has a sense of humor. He was always asking, what do you need? All of that was just, it was all delightful in the midst of a situation of calamity. So there were a lot of things I learned from Omar.
I think a couple of things that strike me right away is it's important to stay grounded and centered. And I'm trying to start every day with at least a period of prayer, meditation, to be grounded. And then turn on the news and see how many massacres and atrocities happen, and then figure out how to respond. Another principle I see from Omar is we don't do this alone. This is collective. We are part of a community. We need to call upon that community and challenge them, but this has to be done with a collectivity. And it has to be done with great faith. You know, Jesus is the model, but it's Jesus the liberator, Jesus who was fearless and confronted suffering and even paid the heavy price. And we have to be willing to pay that price, you know, and then just to work as hard as we can to cast out fear. And I think the path will come to us. I'd also like to mention, you know, in an aside, that every Tuesday, Omar and Sabeel have a thing called Kumi. Kumi comes right out of the Bible. It means to rise up. And they have every week an organization or a person who is working on justice. Most of it in Palestine. I think tomorrow, go to sabeel.org and you'll see the schedule. I believe it's tomorrow. Does anybody know? Maybe 9, 10 o'clock. I think the focus tomorrow is on settler violence or maybe settler colonialism. Every Thursday there's a worship service at 10 a.m. our time, and that is also very grounding. And they are worshiping at Sabeel. Then they have the Way of the Contemporary Cross, where they go to homes that have been blown up. Now we can do that here, whether it's demonstrations or whatever, or our call to the poor in Chicago. So anyway, so the combination of collectivity, personal centering, fearlessness, and then the way of nonviolence. And it's a lifestyle, a worldview that you grow into. Yeah. That's from JVP. Yeah.
I'd like to follow up with that.
Friends of Sabeel North America is another one to Google. Yeah.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about Friends of Sabeel of North America. One of the things that gives staying power to the Berrigan legacy and to what Omar and your colleagues are doing in Palestine is the networks that are built. And I think it'd be a real benefit for the rest of us if you could talk a bit about the North American affiliate and what it does and how it keeps people connected.
Thank you. Yeah, Friends of Sabeel, North America. It's extremely active. It's led now by a Palestinian Christian attorney, Jonathan Kutab. We have an extremely active staff. They're organizing and taking about 2 delegations a month right now. And you could, the best education is to go and see for yourself and be part of one of these. There's nothing like it. I see a few heads nodding there. Go to the Friends of Sabeel website. You know, there is so much going on. There's going to be a launch of a new digital library called the Institute for the Study of Christian Zionism. It's just being launched this week. I think it's tomorrow afternoon or Wednesday. There are Zoom educational interviews, several a week. And then you learn from what other people are doing around the country. So it's really a learning process. There's Canadian Friends of Sabeel that are doing things their own way in Canada and are very strong. There's a Friends of Sabeel UK Sweden, Norway, Germany, and then of course Jerusalem. And there's partners in South Africa, Australia. So it's growing, but the commitment to nonviolent resistance and trying to do our part to mobilize the church that has been largely silent during this genocide is part of our mission and mission of Sabeel and Fasna. You want to answer?
I would just say, I hope I have access, or we have access to this this presentation by Omar. I want to really marinate in it. I think that was such an amazing teaching. If there had been no other words tonight just to hear this, I think there's so much coming right out of the cauldron like that. Powerful. So speaking for myself, I want to just really immerse myself in what he shared here. So I'm glad that we had the opportunity to do that.
So I think that's
there's just one more. There's one question from online that I think would be beneficial for everyone to hear. It's can you suggest particular things to pray for at this time in relation to the war on Gaza?
Yeah, just to preface, you realize a child dies every 40 minutes, 35 minutes, a woman every 55 minutes. We don't even know the elderly. The raw numbers are, and these are only where they have names and can authenticate. It's about 53,000. Med Europe estimates the numbers are really, when you consider the numbers under the rubble, the number who have just vanished when a 2,000-pound bomb is dropped on an apartment building, the numbers range from, I think it's 175,000 to 250,000 or more. We are paying for 80% of this. So that is one thing we can be praying for. How can we stop a permanent ceasefire, not a temporary that Israel plays with or the U.S. plays with, a permanent, then a massive infusion of medicine, food, water. Water and food have been completely shut off. Since when? March 18th. And that's when Netanyahu and Israel broke the ceasefire. So these are some things to pray for, but that total infusion. And I'm praying that this Trump plan with the Abraham Accords falters, and that the Israel-Trump plan of Israel's permanent occupation and rebuilding Gaza for Trump condos in the French, Riviera is just rhetoric that goes by the wayside. Palestinians must have a right to return and to live there, for Gaza to be rebuilt for them. And also pray for the West Bank. The genocide has spread. There are actual pogroms being conducted by settlers guarded by the military who participate in them in Palestinian villages. So those are just a few. But we have to have a permanent ceasefire and end it. This is a genocide in our time. So we need to respond with more courage than we have.
Amen.
I think that's a fitting way to end our conversation tonight. I have a few people to thank. The College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, the Department of Catholic Studies, the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology, the Program of Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies, the Office of Mission and Ministry, the University Library, our student workers, Maria and Michelle, Brenda Washington in Catholic Studies, Elliot in the Center for World Catholicism, Marlon in the Center for World Catholicism, Mike Buddy for putting everything together, and Ken and Don for just a wonderful way of answering our questions, giving us even more to think about. And of course, he's probably not watching it live. I hope he's asleep. To Omar and Sabeel, we will have this available, once Marlon works his magic. We'll have this available for people to watch later. So to Omar and Sabeel, we thank you. We'll know you'll be watching. And thanks to everyone.
Thank you, DePaul, and all of you for coming out.